Welcome back to our Bible study again this week, and I have Jeffrey with me again. He comes to join us about once a month, and so I have included him in our Bible study again this week. And we are going back to the book of Mark, and this time chapter 9, and just directly following when Jesus had been transfigured in front of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. The other 9 apparently were back down at the bottom of the mountain or wherever, and as you may imagine, the people came around apparently looking for Jesus and ready to, wanting him to do miracles and all those things. So that's been happening while Jesus was up there with Peter, James, and John. And so verse 14 is where we finally get back to where Jesus and the other 3 have gotten within eyesight of the multitude. And so when they saw him, verse 15, they were greatly amazed and running to him, saluted him. And Jesus asked them, what's going on here? What are you questioning my disciples about? And so the one from the multitude said that he had brought his son who had a dumb spirit, in other words, couldn't speak, and it did all these things. It tear him, the boy would foam and gnash with his teeth and pine away. I'm not sure all that's involved there. But then here's the key, and we want to talk about this a little bit today, and that is that he brought his son to the disciples. That's the other 9 now. And they could not cast out the demon. And so, Jeffrey, what's your thought about this? The father and his involvement. One thing, I guess, for me, just quickly to begin, is that it's hard to even imagine that there's just this small. I mean, I take it to be a small boy. I don't know how old he really is, but that he, even at that age, has a demon, which maybe we're just not used to that in our culture as much, or we just don't recognize them. But what do you think about this father who has brought his son to the disciples?
Well, I think he definitely had a good reason for bringing him to try to get the demon cast out. And that kind of struck me just looking at this right before we left, that this boy who was possessed by a demon, the demon tore him, and he foamed and gnashed with his teeth and pined away. He was getting worse. He was deteriorating, and truly that's a picture of what every man who is possessed of Satan or living in sin is happening to him, even if they don't recognize it. Satan only brings destruction.
Right.
So this father's concerned for his son. He knows this is not the right way to do it, and he comes to the disciples because he's probably heard about Jesus. And,
right.
And these are the closest people to Jesus, and he's trying to get this problem taken care of. So I think the father was just concerned about his son, didn't want his son to be like that, and was trying to find a solution.
Right. And he did the right thing. Obviously, that's one thing commendable for him to have at least sought from the right place. I just was thinking just now about the woman who had wasted all her money going to the doctors for 12 years and finally came to Jesus. I don't know what was going on here. Maybe he had sought after the common doctors of their day. Who knows? It doesn't tell us about that. But we'll just suppose that he just brought him right to Jesus. I've heard that Jesus can do this, and of course Jesus was in the mountain at that time. And so here's another one I want you to comment on, Jeffrey. In verse 19, so we've just had this interaction that we've shared with you, and then verse 19 he says, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me." Now, who do you think he's talking to?
Yeah, I've always thought he was talking about the disciples, personally, but I can see how maybe maybe this would have applied to the Father too, because he's talking to the Father whenever he says this. And he says later that all things are possible to him that believeth. So I don't know that I can say for sure.
Okay. And I'm not sure that we really know. You're right. That's a good point, where Jesus answereth him.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say them or who he's looking at. But, O faithless generation, if we think of it as the disciples, isn't it kind of interesting? Peter, James, and John, they've just been up there on a mountaintop. They've had a tremendous experience. And of course, you might not say that's faith, because they saw. Mm-hmm. They saw the glory of Christ. But still, they're up there, and you think, well, you must have the three faithful ones, or those who have faith up there. Mm-hmm. You got 9 that don't have faith down below. I mean, it's almost, if you're going to say it's a faithless generation there. So anyway, so they brought the little boy or young person to Jesus, and the Spirit, I assume that's probably as he is in the presence of Jesus and knows this is his arch enemy. The boy fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. And of course, then again, he mentions that he'd had that problem ever since he was a child, and it would do terrible things. Notice verse 22, if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Really, who else can you go to with any more hope for just this? Compassion and help. And of course, we know Jesus could do anything, mm-hmm. Within the Father's will. He could do anything about that problem. And notice then in verse 23, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. You have any thoughts on that verse there? I, of course, not long ago, we just came through Christmas, and so I think about how the angel told Mary, nothing's impossible with God. Mm-hmm. But what do you think about this, and particularly maybe how it relates to us and our belief?
You and I were actually just talking yesterday, I think, about something that ties in with this. We were talking about seeing souls saved and people coming to Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I was saying that I find this temptation to think nobody can be saved. It's just too bad, too hopeless. And I'm not really an author, but I've wished I could write kind of a parable or an allegory of a boy, where they've got these monsters, this darkness around their village, and they've got this weapon, that's been passed down through the ages. That's just for that. Defeating these enemies, these villains, but the boy finds that he has to actually use it. I mean, like we read our Bible, we're so familiar with it, we know all the stories, and I think it's easy for me, at least, to forget that the Bible is the Word of God. It's a sword, it says, and I can't expect people to be changed by it if I don't have the faith to actually tell them what it says, mm-hmm. to use it as a weapon. Mm-hmm. And it seems the Salvation Army and different revivals happened by people who believed mm-hmm. that great things could happen. And those things actually happened. But they happened because they believed. Mm-hmm. And they used the weapon, the Word of God, that they had been given. And that's kind of my maybe rambling.
No, that's good.
My thoughts on that.
And really, it's not just in our belief. A lot of times we almost put a premium on belief, but it's the power of God. Mm-hmm. We recognize that. It's the power of God. And so Jesus himself is saying, if you can believe me, if you can believe that God will do this, mm-hmm. then it's possible. And then I think we're just going to wrap it up here at verse 24 for this particular time. And we could continue on, and I probably will in the future. But I just want to notice verse 24 yet, and really sort of a challenge for each of us. Sometimes we feel like we don't have enough faith. And I've had not really debate, maybe more like a discussion, maybe a little bit like you and I, even now, but a discussion on, is it possible to have little faith? You know, if we're comparing it to the grain of mustard seed, isn't it basically all or none if it's so small? But I just saw again over in 2 Thessalonians, I believe it is, chapter 1 and verse 3. It mentions that, well, let me just read it. We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is meet, because that your faith groweth exceedingly, and the charity of every one of you all toward each other aboundeth. But notice he says that your faith groweth exceedingly. And so it would seem as though you can increase your faith. Mm-hmm. And of course the disciples asked for that to be the case, but there's some thought, well, Jesus didn't really tell them how to. It was almost like it was all or nothing. But right there, Paul indicated that their faith was growing. Mm-hmm. And so we come back to verse 24, and the Father says with tears, Lord, I believe. Or we might say, I'm trying to. Best I know how, I try to believe you. Mm-hmm. But help even where I do lack. Mm-hmm. And I feel like maybe sometimes that ought to be our desire, or ought to be our feeling. Maybe that's not the best way to put that, but at least that we ought to feel like, Lord, I want to grow in my faith. I want to trust you for more. Mm-hmm. You have any comments on that you'd like to?
I don't think I do.
Okay. Really, I feel like it's easy for us to talk about belief. And sometimes we may even approach a real hard circumstance, and we either maybe feel like God isn't going to answer, so we don't ask. Or we do ask, but we're making allowances so that he can, maybe if this doesn't quite work out, then at least I don't feel like my faith was destroyed. Mm-hmm. But really, in the case like this, the man had to have an answer. And it wasn't going to be a question of, well, maybe he sort of did, and it's not quite what I asked, but God must have known better. All those crazy caveats that we put in there. Mm-hmm. But really, I feel like if we would just come even to verse 24 and just say, Lord, that's me. I'm trying to trust you like I know I ought to. Help me where I lack. Mm-hmm. And so for this week, we're just sort of going to wrap it up there. We've gone long enough, I suppose, anyway. But the point is that sometimes we do face some real tough circumstances. And somebody might say, do you have faith to believe God? And if we're really honest, we'd have to say it like this man. I do believe, but Lord, help my unbelief, because I do struggle. And so let's ask God to help us even this week to increase our faith and to help us to trust him more and to look to him for greater victories in the days ahead. Well, God bless you for this week. Thank you, Jeffrey, for joining me again. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again before too awful long. God bless you, each one, and keep increasing or asking God to increase your faith.